Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is John Hutchison. I've been asked to chair tonight's event. As normal at these events, I've got to let you know there are no fire drills planned, and the quickest fire exit is out the way that you came in, but there's also one up in that back corner. I should also mention that tonight is being not only recorded by Nevis Radio, but it's actually going out live on YouTube. So I just want to check that everyone's content with that. I would guess that you're not filming the audience, you're filming the candidates. So is everyone content with that? That's good, thank you. And we have Fiona and Simon and John from Nevis Radio here. I'd just like to put on record our appreciation for them doing that. This is probably about the fourth Hustings that we've had locally here, from Westminster down to a local authority or vice versa, whichever way you want to put the order there. And we've had the support of Nevis Radio right the way through, and that's very much appreciated. Thank you. We also have Mark Entwistle here, who's the senior reporter with the Lochaber Times. Mark, I still regard Mark as fairly new, and my impression is that he's doing really good coverage of local events. So I'm personally very pleased to see that Mark's here. I don't think we'll have anyone else from the press that I'm aware of. Okay, that's great. So let's press on. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here tonight to the excellent new Coole Community Centre, and I do so on behalf of the joint community councils of Coole and Kilmallie. So to my mind, this is exactly what community councils should be doing. They should be encouraging local democracy, encouraging people to vote, and bringing the candidates before the public and to let them speak about their proposals, etc. We should also acknowledge that tonight's by-election, of course, has been necessary because of the sad passing of Councillor Billy McLaughlin in January this year. So it's appropriate before we start to acknowledge that and to acknowledge Billy's contribution and his enthusiasm. Some of his former colleagues are here, and I worked with Billy for a few years, and I can attest to that, certainly. Also, just to note that the voting will be on Thursday, the 5th of April. I should make some declarations really before I start. It's important. I'm not a member of any political party. I'm not a member of either community council, although my wife chairs Kilmallie. I'm also one of a small group of volunteers that's called the Centre for Scottish Constitutional Studies, that's been developing a provisional constitution for an independent Scotland. Also do have form with the Highland Council, having been retired 11 years ago. I'm sure they've forgotten about me completely now as Lochaber area manager, and before that divisional road engineer. So I do have some understanding and some sympathy for the journey that the candidates here are about to embark on. And I should also declare that I've known Catherine, one of our candidates here, for quite a long time when she was working with Lochaber Enterprise through the Leader programme, and we know each other through the Lochaber District Gaelic Choir as well. So I make that declaration here just now. However, I've been asked to chair tonight impartially, which I'll certainly do. I've been an honorary sheriff for 25 years, so I should manage that okay, to chair the meeting with independently, but with your support. That's important too. So all the candidates, the 6 candidates who put themselves forward to stand in this by-election, were invited by the community councils as soon as nominations closed. We have 4 here tonight. Ian Smith, the Scottish Conservative and Unionist candidate, is unable to attend. His agent explained to me that he's been unable to get his shift changed. Ronnie Campbell also called off about an hour ago to do with a family logistical matter where there's a family member in hospital. So the 4 candidates we have here tonight are on the table in order of the elections notice from your left to right. We have Ronald Joseph Campbell, of course, who is not here. We have Alex McInnes, Scottish National Party. Catherine Margaret McKinnon, Independent, Dennis Rickson, Scottish Liberal Democrats, Ian Smith, Scottish Conservative and Unionist, absent, and Colin Wood, Independent. So you're all very welcome tonight. I hope you enjoy the evening. This is the Hustings. It's not a debate, it's not a question time, as we see on the television. And the whole idea is that candidates answer your questions. Each will have that in a particular speaking order. So I do expect some sort of interactions, but not arguments back and forth between the candidates. So you've been told, as I say. So it's better, as far as the audience is concerned, the participants, I should say, you're the participants as well as the candidates. Best that you ask questions as opposed to give opinions or whatever, because folk, with great respect to yourselves, want to hear the candidates. The police have not been informed tonight, but if anybody gets out of line, I'm sure we can deal with that. And that applies to the candidates as well as the audience. So we've got a procedure sorted out. The candidates have agreed a procedure. The candidates will each make an opening statement of 2 minutes. We've drawn lots for the sequence that we'll do that in. And at the end, there'll be a closing statements in the reverse order. Timing will be at the back by Jim Ramsey, who's got the traditional yellow card and red card, and we'll keep people tight to the 2 minutes. Then after that, we'll go on to questions from the floor and questions from the desk. Some people have lodged questions on the way in, so I've got a good stack of questions here, which is excellent that people have lodged as they came in. We'll use a random number order for answering. It might be sensible, if you're asking a question, to give your name and where you're from, for the interest of the folks online, but that's up to you, clearly. I think we would all appreciate, speaking to the candidates now, that their answers be succinct and reasonably short. Everybody will give you credit for that. If you take too long, you might hear the spell. It's come in Gillespie, your time's up, or something like that. So you don't have to ask a question. You don't have to ask a question. And the candidates don't need to answer any questions. If they choose not to answer a question, that's fine, and we'll make no judgment on that. My plan is to finish by 9 o'clock at the latest. I can see some of you have got your hair to wash tonight, including me, so you won't want to be too late. So by 20 to 9 or so, we'll hopefully be on the winding up questions, unless we become exhausted by that time. So I've got a good collection of questions on the desk. I'll give you a wee summary of these before we actually start on the questions. But I'd now like to invite Alex McInnes to make his opening statement. Thank you, Alex.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for inviting me here to tonight's hustings. I have stood in a council election last year in Wester Ross, but we didn't have a hustings. This is my first hustings. I'm very pleased to have been selected by the SNP to stand in this by-election. I've actually got a relationship with Lochaber. I came here 33 years ago as a student, but originally I'm from North Uist in the Western Isles, and brought up in the Gaelic language there. And all my family are fishermen, fish farmers, and crofters. So my whole life has really been spent in the Highlands and Islands. Have spent some time abroad, but don't have much desire now to go abroad. Quite happy here. So, as I said, my family background is that of fishing, crofting, and fish farming. So the sea is really where I like to be. So I live by the sea in a crofting community, and I've got 3 children, my wife, who's from Cumbria. She's from farming background, and all my children are involved in the local community. So my work takes me all around Lochaber. I know a lot of people here. I mean, this is a bit of a homecoming for me in some respects. I used to live in Corpach and really enjoyed my time here. So this is different for me in that I'm actually standing up here as a prospective candidate and really enjoying the experience. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Alex. The second statement is from Colin Woody Wood.
Is that us? Thank you. My name is Woody. I think most of you know me. I work at the Caravan Park just past Corpach there. I've lived here 15 years. My kids go to school, same as you. I live in the community, same as you. I use the same services, drive the same roads. For the purpose of the vote, I'm using both names, Colin Wood and Woody. This will put me at the last on the list of the ballot paper, so when you are voting, if you start at the bottom and work your way back up. Thank you. I want to be councillor for the area because, well, I've watched others do it. And I've felt, like you had imagined, why did they do that? Exactly where did that decision come from? And I've been critical, same as yous. But now, I think, well, it's time to put my money where my mouth is and make the same decisions. And you can be critical of me should I get in. I've gone as independent because I have political beliefs, same as all of you, but I don't feel that it's relevant in the council departments. I don't want to be controlled by a party, told how to vote, told what to do. So I believe as your councillor, I should be making decisions for you, not for a party. Like I say, I've run the business now for about 15 years, and you do get kind of single-trapped. You do want to do the best for your business. You do sort of forget sometimes that you're in the community, and you're part of that community. So now I think it's time for me to start giving back to the community and to start working for you. The projects I've got involved in so far would be various different litter picks. There's a few problems with the roads, as I'm sure you'll know. But I think on the whole, these problems are easy to solve if you're there and if you make the right calls and make the right difference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Colin. Now a statement from Catherine McKinnon.
So I'm Catherine McKinnon. Some of you may know me better as Catherine MacDonald, my maiden name. I grew up in Roybridge, went through the education system there and on to Edinburgh University and travelled about a bit, and then came back to Lochaber in 1992. I had the very good fortune to get a position with Lochaber Enterprise, and as John mentioned, it was kind of the heyday of things going on in Lochaber, I think the 90s, and we worked very closely with the council and all the other agencies in the area. I worked for the LEADER project, which was a European-funded rural development initiative, which actually is still going on today. And I had the good fortune to travel the length and breadth of Lochaber, going out the road to the Isles and down Ardnamurchan, over to Neudert, the Small Isles, working with communities there and helping them with their various projects that were on the go at the time. And it was, very successful because we all worked in partnership. We had a management group that had the council, the Forestry Commission, SNH, and all the various bodies that were working in Lochaber. And certainly through partnership working, we achieved a lot. Following on from that, I moved to Lochaber College, which at that time was just beginning to link up with the University of the Highlands and Islands. The UHI was a new concept at the time, and my role was to integrate the UHI into what was then Lochaber Opportunity Centre and became Lochaber College, which is now the West Highland College, and to establish rural learning centres once again out in the rural areas of Lochaber. So I'm quite familiar with the Ward 11 area, and I have to say it's the most beautiful area that you could possibly be working in and representing. Following on from that, marriage, family, I've been involved with nursery education, Gaelic medium education, various things in the education system, but also through family members with care and more social aspects that as you get older you start to realise there's other things going on in the world. My interest in standing for the council, I've always worked with communities. I enjoy working with communities and I enjoy responding to the needs of people. And I've had various run-ins with the council when councillors maybe stepped in and helped, and it's very good to be able to do that for people and on their behalf. And there's always things that we can do better. It's our Highland Council. I agree with Woody that it's, party politics, there's a place for that. But I think standing as an independent, that's really, the best way to go for representing the people of Lochaber.
Thank you very much, Catherine. Thank you. And thank you. And our last opening statement is from Dennis Rickson. Dennis. How are you hearing at the back? Is it okay?
Hello, is that better? I've lived in Malik for over 40 years. I was a school teacher and had a small bookshop, which some of you may remember. In general terms, what do Lib Dems stand for? Well, we're a unionist party, but very strong on localism. We don't like centralisation and uniformity. We think the presumption should always be in favour of devolving power downwards and not just to Inverness. Not every part of Scotland shares the same problems. If you want to deal with local issues and local circumstances, then decentralisation is the best way. Secondly, what are my particular priorities? 1, support for small business. All politicians like spending your money, but currently it's very scarce. The best way of raising living standards is to have a strong local economy. There are things that local authorities can do here. They can help with planning, provision of small workshops, rates holidays, business mentoring. In particular, I'd like to see us encourage more young people to start their own business. It can be quite an intimidating process. Secondly, housing and transparency. One issue that was brought up at the Hustings last year and which I've met on the doors this year is that of affordable housing for local young people. I admit this is difficult for councils when they're strapped for cash, but I would argue at looking for more flexible solutions. When I was 1 and 20, I would have been perfectly happy with a tiny bed sit. If you settle down with someone and have a family, so your requirements grow. In later life, they probably contract again. You may not want a family house with a garden to maintain. People talk about getting onto the property ladder, but I think we should also talk about changing requirements at different stages of our lives. I would like to see our council develop a sort of property pathway. In this context, there's one other thing that I would add, which is that councils need to work really hard at transparency. When we make decisions about housing or planning, we need to be prepared to fully explain our reasons for them. It is very important that people trust their councils. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dennis. So now we'll press on with questions, and I'll give you a flavour of the questions that I have here so that you know what's potentially liable to be coming. Can I just check whether John Wallace is here? You're here, that's fine. Do you want to ask your own question when it comes, or will I read it? That's fine. I'm not going to do it just now, but it's handy just to know. Good, thanks. So I've got questions here, one on Highland Council and Community Council funding, one about the benefits and disbenefits that Liberty may or may not bring to Cool and Corpach, asking about candidate stance on Scottish independence and Brexit, a general question about Highland Council's budget and balancing priorities, question about who are your political heroes, and a question for the independents about whether they will join the independent bloc or not, whether people have been involved in voluntary community activities, how candidates who do not live in the ward might represent people in the ward, and how candidates will manage their time commitments. And there's also a question about care homes. So that's the flavour of what we've got already. There might be other questions. Could you give a wee indication if anyone in the hall has another question they would want to? There's one at least to, yeah, another 3 or 4, 5, 6. That's fine. Right, so Tam Skelpidon through Dublin Mire. Let's just do this. So the first question I'm going to go for, Highland Council recently slashed funding to community councils by about 55%. How should our community council best spend their new budget of 2.5 pence per month per person? And I'd like to ask Colin Woodywood to start off, please.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a good question. When we were doing the spending here, we said we had 6 pence per head for various expenses. And that's quite difficult to stay to. So how a community council is meant to make any sort of difference with 2.5 pence is really quite difficult. How to spend it? I don't think the community councils are doing anything that they shouldn't be doing right now. The newsletters are very, very important. The meetings are very important. The best way, I would have said, is to try and attract sponsorship from local businesses. What I really want to try and do is join the community with the business. There are a lot of strong businesses here. You can see it. You can see at every fete, at every open day, businesses give their time freely and happily. And I think it was easier to try and link up businesses with community councils.
Okay. Thanks very much, Colin. Alex McInnes, please. Yeah, same question, thanks.
You hear me now? Yeah, it's again, it's a really, really good question. It's not a lot of money, 2.5 pence, dropping from 6. I can only vouch for using my own experience where I am today. I work in the seafood industry. As I say, it takes me the length and breadth of the west coast of Scotland and the Highlands and Islands. So coming from a remote community and living my life the way that I have, about 15 years ago, I joined a business with a number of like-minded people, and we put in place a set of values, and we decided that we were going to do something completely different, and that was go out and build a business which at that stage probably was going to be sold, and a number of jobs, a lot of jobs actually would be lost and probably moved to the south of England. So we set in motion a kind of strategy, a plan based over about 10 years. So that the kind of principles that we worked on were trust, respect, commitment, and effective teamwork. And we asked the employees to trust us at that moment in time, took that business from, as I say, almost at a stage where they're going to sell it, to a business now that's employee ownership. At this moment in time, I'm leading on a project with some colleagues in a different part of the Highlands and Islands, and we're working with the local trust and community council. And our intention is to do something similar, maybe not put the business in employee ownership initially, but we're going to make a huge commitment to the community in respect of injecting cash into the community where they'll become more self-sufficient. They won't be dependent so much on the councils because there's difficult times coming down the track. We know that. I see it. I live in a remote community. The roads are falling apart. You know, there's a lot of issues. So that's where I am today in respect of being able to invest back into communities. That's the kind of thinking that I'm involved in.
Good. Thanks very much, Alex. So the question, just to remind ourselves, is about a community council funding. How should a community council best spend their new budget of 2.5 pence per month per person? Catherine McKinnon, please.
I think it's strange that the Highland Council, isn't investing more in the community councils, who are sort of the local arms of the council and who are reaching out to the local people in the community. So I think it's very poor that the budgets have been cut to such a state that there isn't much to actually spend. As to how community councils can spend it, well, every community council is different, and it has the knock-on effect for the various groups that community councils generally tend to support in their annual spend, and they'll need to work with those groups to find other sources of funding, whether it be business or whether it's grant funding from other sources. But in this day and age, that's not easy, and it's just obviously going to be a difficult time. But community councils need to make it very clear back to Highland Council that it's unacceptable and that they need more money, and when they're reviewing budgets, then to try to make that not happen again in the future.
Okay, thanks very much, Catherine. Dennis Rickson, please.
Of course, it's not an ideal situation. Nobody would pretend it would. It is. The only thing I think I would say is that I think community councils generally can take satisfaction at what they do. To give you an example, we have a local rag at the west end of the ward called West Word, and every single month, community councils, the various community councils locally, put in a piece to West Word, and we can all read it. I noticed in the Open Times today, somebody actually emailed me to give, or wrote to me about bus services to Roy Bridge. And there in the Open Times from yesterday was a comment about bus services from Roy Bridge and what the community council had brought up and what was the end result of it. And so personally I feel that community councils, yes, it's a dreadful situation not to have as much money, but they should, and I would suggest, take great satisfaction from the fact that whatever they do does get out into the public domain, is aired, and helps put pressure on regional councillors and MSPs and so on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dennis. The second question is, if you are elected, how will you manage to meet the demands on your time within your existing commitments? Dennis Rickson, please.
First of all, I'm retired at long last. I do have an interest in history. I have a blog and I've written books and this sort of thing. So, but these are all things which I do voluntarily. I have no other commitments at all beyond a role as the Secretary of the Heritage Centre in Malig, which does involve me in a bit of bureaucracy every so often. But I have no other commitments and can give my time fully to the job as councillor.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Alex McInnes, please.
Yeah, I'm a similar vein that I've worked out and looked at the commitment that I'll need to give to the job, and it's enormous in some cases, and it'll become more demanding as these cutbacks begin to hit. So for me personally, at the moment I'm self-employed, so I don't actually work for anybody. I've got some colleagues that I'm going to lean on heavily for a number of years, and I plan my month in advance. I have to, I'm very confident that I can give the job the commitment that it needs.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Catherine McKinnon, please.
I'm not retired, but I am at home most of the time, bringing up family. Family are growing up, they're mostly in high school. My husband works, he's contracting, he's very flexible in what he does, and if I need to be away, he can be at home, or if he needs to be away, I can be at home. So from a time commitment point of view, I've got flexibility in my time commitment. I'm also very much aware, and from what I hear, a lot gets done by email. You can use video conferencing, you can be very clever with your use of time, and although obviously there's travel and that involved, you can do a lot from home, and I'm used to doing most of my work from home at the moment as it is anyway.
Thank you, Catherine. Colin Wood, please.
Well, I am busy already, same as you are. You work hard, you've got kids, you find time, you speak to people, you listen to people, you address their problems. You can't not find time. It's, yes, you can do Skype, you can do video conferencing and various different things, but effectively, this is a job that becomes a lifestyle, and it just becomes something that you live. So.
Good, thank you very much, Colin. A question from the hall, please. Gillian, please. Let's have that. Should be on.
Gillian Sloan, live out in Kinlochale, but I have a business on the High Street. And it's actually, the question, unsurprising to many people here, is about parking. I've seen in the draft budget, and the parking changes look ridiculous. They're increasing the parking by not just, what was it, fivefold, and they're taking away the free permits to members, to people who live locally for the West End and the Anir too. What are you going to do to make sure that people in Fort William get fair deal when it comes to parking, especially because there's lots of people on the High Street who work on minimum wage or are volunteers who cannot afford these new charges which are coming in?
Thank you, Gillian. Colin Wood, please.
Actually, there are already new parking attendants. I saw them in the High Street yesterday, nice flush jackets. the high street is already suffering and always has suffered because of the retail parks. The best way, I think, to do it, and it would be interesting to see just how much parking is going to, how much revenue is going to be taken compared to how much the new wages are going to be for the new parking attendants. There has to be, at least one car park that has to be free in order to try and even up the competition. Either that or you start charging for retail parks.
Okay, thank you. Catherine, please.
Well, obviously these are changes that have obviously been proposed at the moment, and it's difficult to say that you could go in and you could actually change everything that's been talked about. I think there is an issue with parking in Fort William. I think there's an access problem in Fort William in access to the high street, and I think there's a much bigger picture that needs to be looked at with the likes of the retail parks outside and what's happening on the high street and how people actually get access to the high street, because people can drive through Fort William without even knowing it's there, so they're not stopping. So I think there's a bigger picture that needs to be looked at as well, but obviously accessibility isn't helped with high parking charges, and also the location of the parking isn't great either. So fully agree that yes, there's a problem and an issue that needs to be addressed, but as to how you actually address that, I think there's a bigger picture that needs to be looked at as well.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Dennis Strickson, please.
I feel that probably my best response to this is say that we should look at this from the point of view of the needs of the users. Now, there's no doubt that some people have special needs when it comes to parking. If you're not very mobile or if you're disabled or something, then there obviously needs to be an allocation of parking spaces simply for that. It's also the case that if you're working there or if you're getting deliveries and so on, that maybe there needs to be allocation for that. Beyond that, I would say it's not just a Fort William issue. I mean, I know that your question was with Fort William, but in Malaga in the summertime, you can't park for love or money. There's just nowhere to go. And I suspect this parking problem is throughout Highland Council area. In Glasgow, it's 60p for every 12 minutes at a metre. So there are issues in different places. From the point of view of Fort William, I'd like to see the priorities go, first of all, to those people with maximum needs. And then after that, perhaps one of the arguments should be that we need to create more parking spaces for Fort William.
Okay, thank you. Alex, please.
Being in Fort William today, and I guess it's not busiest time of the year, it's just kicking off. But even today, this morning, there was hardly any parking in Fort William. So there's probably not enough parking in Fort William when it's really busy. But I think there has to be priority access, there's no doubt about it. Also, I think that it's too early to call. I think there has to be consultation. I don't think there's anything concrete in place at the moment. So you have to have the consultation, and that includes public consultation, and everybody has to be involved in that, including the community. So for me at this moment in time, I don't think that has to be something that is written in stone. I think there has to be consultation on it.
Okay, thank you, Alex. The next question, a kind of predictable question here. What are the, and I'm going to be coming to Dennis first, just so it gets a bit of warning. What are the likely benefits and disbenefits that Liberty will bring to Cool and Corpach? What are the likely benefits and disbenefits that Liberty will bring to Cool and Corpach?
Well,
Dennis,
I think
please.
the obvious benefit is, can you hear right? Yes.
Yep.
The obvious benefit is employment. The disbenefits or the problems associated with that is if they're talking about 300 new employees coming in, and these employees will be largely drawn from
Okay,
outside.
right, folks, I'm not quite hearing you, so I think if everyone just could, I think it just means putting the microphone a bit closer.
Closer to. Is that better? Sorry.
Yeah. Just wave if it's not clear. Thank you very much.
Benefits 300 new jobs or whatever. This benefits the fact that for those 300 people, if they come in from outside, you have to provide housing, you have to provide school, there's extra pressure on health services and so on. The only other thing I would say is, I mean, it would be daft not to welcome this with open arms. It could be a huge game changer for the whole area if it came good. One of the advantages of being older is that you do remember things which have been advertised as being wonderful game changers, which don't actually come to pass. Many years ago, the DeLorean company invested in Northern Ireland. A lot of public money went into it and went belly up. I would always prefer to see a situation where there were 1,000 new small businesses employing one man each, than one new business employing 1,000 men or women. But that's my general thing. I mean, welcome it with open arms, but be aware of the fact that there are consequences in terms of usage of health services, education, housing.
Okay. Thank you, Dennis. Alex McInnes, please.
Yeah, I think personally, like Liberty is very good news for the area. It's going to bring its own challenges, and if the figures are correct, and Dennis has just mentioned some of them, but potentially the population growth in Port William on the back of it is going to be enormous. You know, there's 600 jobs, and with that actually comes more than 1,000 people, 1,200 people, because they bring their families. So you're actually looking at potentially one of the biggest explosion growths in the Highlands and Islands, and Scotland potentially, we've seen in a long time. But you can't knock it back. You know, you need a diverse economy. You can't just live on one or two businesses. Some very, very good businesses here in the area already. But we definitely need Liberty. And what they're actually going to transform here, from what I can understand, and what they're going to deliver to the UK economy, and we'll talk about Brexit later, I don't think they're going to be so affected by it, but it's only 5% of what the UK needs. So, you know, it's massive, to be quite honest.
Thank you. Catherine McKinnon, please.
Quite clearly, from an employment point of view, Liberty is very good news, and for young people going through school, there's opportunities that are opening up. However, Lochaber does have 100% employment, as I understand it, at the moment, so obviously there'll be a huge influx of people, and that in itself brings pressures and things that need to be adapted to. But it also brings opportunities in that, you know, we're talking about the problems with parking in the high street. It brings an opportunity to have a bigger picture of what Lochaber will be like. And if it does happen that we do have to have all this extra housing and extra services, then there are opportunities and there'll be investment to make the facilities available for that to happen. Something that was mentioned to me about, obviously with traffic congestion at Lochaber Bridge that we had last year, nobody wants to go through that again. I think we're all probably expecting that we will be going through that again. Someone said, well, why don't we move the train station out to somewhere like Blair or at Lochaber Bridge? Do we need to go into town? Could we have some sort of shuttle service into town that would take people in? That would then free up. We've already seen, well, in my lifetime, the train station moved from the other end of town to the end that it is in now. Maybe it's time for it to move out to Lochaber Bridge, so the Ballig train could meet there, and that could be a hub and go to Port William. So all of these big things, if you've got a big influx of people and something big happening in a town, then you can look at a big picture like that and attract funding for that. So there are opportunities. There's scepticism. We all hear scepticism as well. But yes, I mean, I think we need to embrace the opportunity, but just be aware of the impact that it'll have on our service as well. Hopefully we've got a lovely new hospital going to happen as well. All of these things become much more possible when there's big developments going on and people are sitting up and watching what's going on. So there's a big opportunity there, and let's hope that it does materialise the way that we've been told that it probably will.
Thank you, Catherine. And Colin Wood, please.
I think the main benefit is not the extra jobs that it's going to bring, it's the jobs that it has saved. Because we were looking at Rio Tinto closing, we were looking at a massive hole there for employment. I think it's a bit disingenuous to say that there's full employment here. There is full employment, but it's not always proper jobs, it's not always proper wages. And I think there is space and scope for, if Liberty are employing new people, that the local people get the kind of first shot at that rather than people moving into the area. The obvious disadvantages are the traffic. There's no two ways about it. The traffic already is going to snarl up. The motorhomes is busier than ever. So you've got motorhomes, you've got the log lorries, and now you're going to have more lorries on through development, through building on, through the work that's going to bring. I think these have to be looked at first. So absolutely fine. Yes, sustain what they have. Yes, carry on building, but they have to be building in plans for how they're going to cope with the extra traffic and how they're going to cope with the extra homes.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Probably an appropriate time. I was going to mention this at the end, but on Monday evening, Kamali Community Council at their regular meeting have invited Duncan Mackison, who is he's a PR person in a way. He's the head of Liberty Estates, and he's been invited to Kamali Community Council to talk about Liberty's proposals for Corpach, or Corpach Harbour as they're now calling it. So that Community Council meeting is open to the public, so it's open to folks from Cool, obviously, and anybody else for that matter. And my understanding is that there'll be a planning official there from Highland Council and someone from Highlands and Islands Enterprise in support of that. So I think that's the opportunity for people to find out exactly what the proposals are in Corpach, because they'll certainly affect folk in Cool as well. So I think that's sufficient to say about that. So that's 7:15, I think, on Monday in Kamali Community Centre. Right, so that's the commercial. So let's lighten things a bit and ask, who are your political heroes? And in this gender-balanced world, we'll start off with Catherine.
Well, I think I'm going to disappoint you because I don't actually have any political heroes. I kind of stand back from politics, and I'm probably a floating voter in that I decide probably on the day I go to vote as to which party I'm going to vote for, because our political world changes quite a lot and the issues of the times change with every election that we have. So I don't follow any, I perhaps, rather than a political hero, I've got a few that are certainly not my heroes, but I'm not going to name them either, so I'm sorry, I can't give you anything to take home.
That's great, thank you. Colin Wood, please.
Yeah, the question threw me as well, I have to say. Probably, looking back, Tony Benn, who, it's very difficult to keep, in politics, it's very difficult to keep your integrity, and it looked like he did. He stood against his party for going to war, so you really have to admire her for that. I also think Margot MacDonald, because she fought for her community. She was a mother, she was a working woman as well, but she made the time, and she really did challenge the political leader at that time.
Good. Thank you, Colin. Alex McInnes, please.
Yeah, might not be any surprise here, but for me it was Winnie Ewing, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't know who Winnie Ewing was, and I came up on a flight from London to Inverness a long time ago, and I had the privilege of sitting next to her, and I honestly didn't know who she was, but she made a big impact on me, because she had a drama on the way up, whatever, but she was really enlightening and quite challenging, and it's one of the best flights I've ever been on. So that's always been in my head. She always sticks in my head as someone that was really full of integrity, to be quite honest.
Good, thank you. Alex, Dennis, please.
Well, I understand Catherine's reticence, because, as I'm sure you'll bear witness, all politicians applaud, also all would-be politicians. From an actual tangible hero, I think probably Lloyd George.
Dennis, we're not quite hearing you.
Sorry. Is that better?
Yeah.
Lloyd George, probably. But I'm also going to throw out a curveball. There was an anarchist called Peter Kropotkin, who was a professor, a Russian prince, who was also a professor of botany at Cambridge University in the early part of the last century, and he wrote a wonderful book called Mutual Aid, which is all about how human beings and other species get on best if they work together. In other words, instead of the selfish gene, that there's a cooperative aspect to human activity. And I thought it was a wonderful inspiration, so I recommend it. Mutual Aid, Peter Kropotkin.
Good. Thank you very much, Dennis. Well, one of mine is the late Bob Crow, who was the General Secretary of the RMT trade union. So there's a surprise for everyone. Any questions from the hall, please? Leigh. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Leah Hunter. I live here in Cool. Thanks for putting yourselves forward to be our councillor, first of all. But I'm particularly interested to find out what skills and experience working with local communities like the ones we have in Cool and Malig that you have, And if you have worked or supported local communities in the past, how have you engaged with them and what sort of positive differences have you made?
That's great. Well, that kind of links into another question. That's excellent. Thank you for that, Leah. Colin, please.
Thank you, Leah. Before I came here to live in Corpick, I stayed in Inverness, and I lived in the Markinch area, and I was very well involved with the Markinch Community Centre down there, and I wrote the newsletter for a number of years. There are similarities in the areas. The housing problem, drugs project in Inverness, and although it started off as being to help people on recreational drugs, it really was the heroin epidemic that was exploding at the time, so it became a drop-in centre for that, if you like. I got an awful lot from that job, and I think it's worth knowing that business is one thing, but having a foot in both camps and working for your community is probably the most powerful thing you can do.
Thanks very much, Colin. Alex, please.
Yeah, I think I mentioned earlier on about the project that I'm involved in at the moment, which has actually been running for about 4 years now, so it's not even trading. But that's how long it's taken to develop the relationship. And that kind of community engagement will carry on. I also involved in a pipe band, the Lochaber Junior Pipe Band. Played in the pipe band, although Robert's too old now because he's 18, 19. But my son and daughter play in that, and I put a lot of effort into that. It's something that I'm quite passionate about. All the kids are really, they're great fun to be with. That was a 3-year plan that we had, and we got them competing. And last year, they were crowned world champions of the World Pipe Band Championships in Glasgow, and that was a huge, because it's a tiny wee place, and we got all these kids together, really enthusiastic. Neil Stewart, who's the piping tutor, was really, really enthusiastic. And we just got the funding together. It cost £20,000 a year. And last week we had some money from Highland Council. That become more and more difficult to get. But we've got a really strong community. We've got really strong parents. And we do lots over the summer fundraising. I put a lot of effort into that, and it means a lot to me. And it's been such a success. We've now got a development band. So many kids, they looked at their peers. There's so many kids now that want to join the pipe band.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex. Catherine McKinnon, please.
Most of my adult life I've been involved with communities. When I worked with the enterprise company, my role was to go around communities. I think I went to every single community council and community group in West Lochaber, and spent my life going to evening meetings and driving back at 2 o'clock in the morning from Kilchoan and places like that, talking to people. But it was great because everyone wanted to talk to you because I had lots of money to spend. We had a really good budget for later. So when you've got a budget to spend and money that you can give to communities, it's very easy to work with communities and make a difference. Out the road to the Isles, Dennis mentioned the Westward community newspaper. That was one of the first ones that we funded, and Jill Dufresne out there was wanting to get that off the ground, and we were able to make that happen, and Westward is continuing today, 20 years on or whatever. So I've worked with a lot of community groups and been able to assist them to get their ideas, to help with constitution.
At most association is the Heritage Centre in Malaga. And I do remember Catherine because she came down and she had our time. We spent our time trying to part her from it, and she very generously gave us money, and it's still going now. And that's my sort of remaining commitment. That's the one I concentrate on.
Good, and thank you. Next question is the one submitted by John Wallace, Longacres, Banavie. And this is the question about care homes. Highland has a different approach to integration of health and social care, in that NHS Highland acts as the lead agency in providing most adult care services. However, councillors still have an important role in scrutinising NHS Highland's delivery of these plans.
It is widely reported that NHS Highland is imminently to present a report on the future of care homes in Highland. The Director of Public Health has seemed to indicate this may see a reduced commitment to provision of residential home placements across the region. Given that Lochaber already has significantly lower care home placements per population compared to Highland and Scottish averages, how will candidates work with colleagues and partner agencies to ensure the care of frail and elderly residents in our communities is protected and enhanced? Alex McInnes, please.
Yeah, it's something I was discussing with somebody today, and it's probably going to be one of the biggest challenges. You know, there's one thing looking after our young folk as they grow up and protecting them, but I think the elderly is a massive challenge. And I picked up on something the other day, the Dalmore residential home as well. So it's quite worrying that is actually going on. And to be honest, that is, for me personally, that will be something new that I will have to make a huge commitment to, because I think it's going to be a massive challenge with the funding gaps that are going to occur. So I'm going to have to work very hard with colleagues, and I already said today that I'll work with anybody. I'll work with standing councillors, obviously with Highland Council, with businesses as well, to ensure that there aren't any funding gaps, and we actually, you know, we do deliver the necessary health care, because I know there's a lot of cutbacks coming down the track, or perceived cutbacks.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Dennis Strickson, please.
I think anybody who's had an elderly parent going through this process knows what a nightmare it is. The only thing that I would add to that is that not only is there a problem locally here, but can you imagine the situation in some of the more rural communities? I mean, I live 44 miles away, and
excuse me, we're not.
Sorry.
Speak up just a bit, thanks.
Sorry. I live 44 miles away, and you can probably imagine what it's like from somebody right out in the sticks if they have to be taken away to a care home, which is a long way from where they've lived for all their lives. So this is a huge issue. The other thing is that simply in terms of demographics, more of us are living longer. So it's got to be something to which we commit resources in the future. We're all living longer, and obviously, you know, as we get elderly, we need the provision of these care homes. I don't think anybody would deny that that's something we have to look at. It's just a question of how seriously we take it and how we budget.
Thank you. Colin Wood, please.
Thank you, yes. I was very pleased to have a conversation with us about this today. It's not just this area. Argyll and Bute are already making sweeping cuts as well. We are already making use of Argyll and Bute's services as well. So we're already, with Argyll and Bute reducing their amount of bed spaces, we're already losing a fair amount. There is, as I said, there's sweeping cuts coming. There's not going to be enough money in the budget. We are going to have to look at how we do this properly and how we make use of what we have already. I think more home care, whenever possible, is going to have to be utilised. The other thing is that people are already falling through the net. If somebody is elderly is already admitted to hospital, there's no indication, there's no guarantee that those safety nets will actually catch them and help them, unless it's always the relative that's doing the digging. It's always a relative that's doing the running already. So it's probably going to be the biggest challenge, as you say, but one that we're going to have to fight together. We're going to have to fight as a community.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Catherine McKinnon, please.
It's something that I feel strongly about, and I think it's unacceptable that the council is, or that NHS Highland are cutting their budgets and looking at making all these cuts. And I think the council needs to work with them, and I think everyone needs to shout loudly. Oh, sorry. Everyone needs to shout loudly. I noticed in the paper that in Struntian they're doing a very good job of that, and I think all communities need to shout loudly to ensure that care provision is there for people, and not just for the elderly, for anyone that's needing care, because it's always those that are least able that get hit by cuts. I also think, you know, we're hearing about all these cuts that are coming, but also with Brexit, we're supposed to be much better off because we're coming out of Europe. So we would hope that there would be more money that would flow, and it has to flow in the right direction. But I think people, we all need to shout together to make sure that the care provision, the care of the elderly, and as, you know, that need becomes greater, we need to make sure that that is actually provided for, because it affects us all. It may not affect us today, but it will as time goes by, or perhaps it has in the past, and it's something that's extremely important.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. A question from the floor, please, from ex-councillor Bill Clark. Can we just, we'll just get the microphone, Bill, for the benefit of the YouTube, etc.
No, the bill needs it.
Could I ask, first of all, the independent candidates and the Lib Dem candidate, if elected, is it your intention to join the independent-led administration in Highland Council, bearing in mind that the independents are a political group, just like all the other parties in Inverness? Now, if you take into account the recent budget was agreed by every single independent, by every single Lib Dem, by every single Labour, that's what you're going to be up against. And bluntly, it's a waste of time going up there simply to join another political group. Now, Dennis, you mentioned that you like this business about...
So is the question solely to the independents then?
No, I'm going to speak to everyone in a minute.
Well, you're not really.
Yeah,
you're going to ask a question.
Well, it's a question. It's a question, but it's only fair to let them know why I'm asking the question.
Explain the context, and then
That's
really
right.
briefly, and then we'll get on to the
Right.
candidates.
Well, you say that you want to see devolved powers. Well, when Highland had the opportunity to do that, they didn't take it. They voted against it. And that included every single member of the independents, the Lib Dems, the Labour group. So that's why my next question is, would you vote to dissolve Highland Council and bring real powers back to the areas? In other words, people living in Lochaber will make decisions for Lochaber.
Right. Let's separate the two questions, and we'll run quickly through the first. Addressed to the independents, I think, whether the independents will join the independent bloc, and then we'll deal with the second question about would you vote for a smaller Highland Council. Go on.
It's an excellent question. You are quite, the fact you're not running is quite a loss to the area, I have to say. I've got my answer written here, and it's no, I wouldn't join an independent group because, as you say, it has its own whip. It's just another party, and there is no benefit to it, as far as I can see. The other question, the question before it, though, about social care, is a real worry. We need to try and make change.
Okay, that's fine. So this question is to the independents, really. Dennis, if you could pass it to Catherine, please, and then Catherine, about the question about will you join the independent, and then we'll go back. I'll invite you actually to go from that on to the second question about would you vote for a smaller Highland Council?
Yes, well, as I understand it, there's only one councillor that's out with the party system. Am I incorrect?
It's okay. Just So the question is for the future, whether you, as an independent, will join the independent group.
Well, I think probably yes is the answer. It's obviously not the answer that you're wanting, Bill, and you're more dyed in the wool than I am, but if you're part of a party, you don't always have to stay within it. And if, obviously, you've experienced a lot more than what I have, and you're coming from a direction on that, but I think there's benefits to be had in being part of that.
Okay, thank you. Catherine, could I invite you, since you've got the microphone, to go on to the second question about whether you would vote to, I think Bill's question was dissolve, so I presume he had in mind a smaller local authority. What's your view of a smaller local authority?
You're talking about going back to the days of the district council and having a district council. Well, I actually think that would be excellent if it was possible to go back to that. And maybe the Highland Council in its current format has lived long enough in that format to experience change. And I think going back to a local power would be good for the area in that you can have much closer connection with the local people and achieve things for your local area rather than get outvoted for the greater heart of the Highlands, which is seen to be Inverness.
Okay. Thank you, Catherine. Dennis, please.
Would I join the Liberal group? Absolutely. I'm proud of being a Liberal.
No, the question now is, would you vote to dissolve Highland Council? In other words, I think, are you in support of smaller local authorities? I think that's...
I still remember Lochaber District Council. I've got no problem at all with having smaller councils which are more local. The trouble is that's not a decision that Highland Council will take. That's a decision taken on a national level. If you ask me in the abstract, no problem at all. But that's not our decision to make.
Thank you. Colin, please.
Yeah, regarding the second half of the question and dissolving the council, I'm not even sure that it will last the course. There's 28 independents. How are 28 people all voted in on an independent ticket examine where they felt and how they felt regarding did they feel Scottish, did they feel British? Regarding the Brexit, we don't know what's coming down the line. I get the impression it's not going to be all good. I think there would be benefits, hopefully.
So the question is, how did you vote? What's your stance?
Oh, sorry, I voted yes for independence. Yeah. I voted to remain for Brexit.
That's fine. Thanks very much. Let's move on to Catherine, please.
I think at this point in time, it doesn't really matter what we voted. What we have is we're not independent and we are coming out of Europe. So the future is what's important, and as to how I would vote if that came up again, then, as I said earlier, I wait until I see all the facts on the table until the moment comes up, and I would take my decision then. So what's happened historically really is irrelevant. What we have at the moment is we're not independent, we're coming out of Europe, and what happens in the future when we see what our Brexit deal is going to look like and what comes up then I would take a view on that there. So I'm afraid I'm going to sit in the fence on that one.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. Dennis Rickson, please.
I voted no at Scottish independence. I'm an unreconstructed unionist. On the question of Brexit, I voted remain, but with misgivings, because I've always regarded Europe as a sort of corporate club. As you well know, the Liberal Democrats have taken a hard line on Brexit. I don't actually personally go with that. I tend to feel that I'm a Democrat before I'm a Liberal Democrat. So if at the end of the day the country votes for something, I believe you should go with it. In the short term, I think we will take an economic hit. In the long term, I think we'll be fine. Why? Because Europe's proportion of world trade is actually declining all the time. The really important movements are in the Far East, not in Europe now. And I think that over the longer term, we should be fine. I have no doubt, though, we will have a few difficult years ahead of us.
Good. Thank you, Dennis. That's everyone. That's good. Thank you. Moving on to the next question. Alex, sorry. I must have ticked you off. Sorry, Alex. Apologies for taking you off here. What's your view of independence and Brexit?
Yeah. So I'm definitely independent. Going back to the conversation with Winnie Ewing a long time ago. So I'm definitely independent. In respect to Brexit, I work in the seafood industry. I could cry sometimes, to be quite honest, with what's happened recently. There's a lot of people I work with they are EU nationals as well, and it's going to be really difficult. So I've got people at this moment in time who are looking to emigrate to Canada. It's really, really worrying, to be quite honest. Really worrying. I don't know what it's going to do to my industry. So it really, really concerns me, to be quite honest. And I don't think we really know, how the end game is going to play out.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Alex, when you've got the microphone, can I ask you another question? Because I'm pretty sure this only applies to you. And the question, and I may be wrong in this, so I'll stand to be corrected. If you do not live in this ward, how can I trust that you will be interested in and fight for issues that directly affect the residents in this ward, or is your interest in this seat purely political?
No, it's not. It's not purely political. When the opportunity arose to stand in the ward, I did question that. So I came down here and I spoke to the local branch, and obviously they very kindly adopted me. As I mentioned earlier, I stood last year in the Westeros branch, and I was very close to getting in. I was short of 50 votes. That was a big disappointment to me, because the issues a year ago are the same issues that we're discussing today, to be quite honest, but even they're actually worse. And you know, I actually came here just over 33 years ago as a student. So I've lived in the area. So I've lived in Invergarry twice. I've lived in Lochaber twice. I've lived in Fort William. I've lived in Corpach. I was married here. My son was born here. My kids come down here to pipe, to play shinty. You know, I do know a lot of people here. So I think I mentioned earlier on, there's a little bit of a homecoming here. I probably, to be honest, I feel more comfortable standing here than I do in Westeros, and that's no disrespect to Westeros, because it's a massive area. It's a lot more people there. You know, you've got to spend a lot more time as well. So I feel that it's not for me political. I really do want to stand here. I really like the people here. I've got a lot of friends, got a lot of connections, and I do want to help, because there's going to be a lot of challenges, and a lot of my work is here. So, you know, the whole thing about the seafood going forward, it's a really important area for me. It's massive. The actual seafood that comes out of this area.
Okay, thanks, Alex. I'm not sure that it was wise to mention your family coming here to play shinty, though, but I'll leave that for you. Any other questions from the hall? Okay, here's the next one here on the list. Given the relentless ideological pressure on local authority funding and the annual difficulties of balancing Highland Council's budget, where and how would you cut services or raise income next year? Where and how would you cut services or raise income next year? That's Dennis Rickson, please.
I don't necessarily think it's just a choice between cutting services and raising income. I sometimes feel it could be as simple as improving services. I can only speak of one area from my own personal experience, and that's education. During a career of nearly 34 years, I must have spent thousands and thousands of hours filling out paperwork, usually instructed by somebody else, because it's very top down in the education system, and to be quite honest, most of it was absolute tosh. I just feel that today with education we're drowning in bureaucracy at times. I would like to see, we have now cluster heads, people doing a lot of administrative tasks, an enormous amount of time taken up with bureaucracy. I would like to see the council strip back a lot of that to free up time so we can actually improve education. Now, I'm not qualified to speak about the health service, but I do remember somebody who worked in the health service locally saying to me that she'd had this conversation with her boss, and she'd said to him quite simply, I can either come to another meeting or I can treat 2 more patients. Which do you want? And I think in a way that sort of encapsulates my view about provision of local services.
Good. Thank you, Dennis. Catherine, please.
I certainly don't think cutting services is the way to go, and I think that Highland Council needs to be strong in demanding more money from the Scottish Government to deliver the services that it has to deliver. I also think the Highland Council needs to be more efficient in the way that it delivers services, and perhaps have more efficiencies built in there. I think we can all think of things that we look at and we think is a total waste of money, and perhaps not just councillors but people on the ground need to be telling the Highland Council and working with the council to ensure that they're getting best value and are making the best use of their budgets. So my hope would be that there won't be any more service cuts, that there will be more money that goes into councils, and that we won't be seeing what we're seeing at the moment.
Thank you. Alex McInnes, please.
Yeah, obviously not involved in the recent Highland Council budget, and I'm not, I don't profess to be an expert on budgets. Can do cash flow and things like that, but I honestly, I'd hope that we wouldn't get into this situation, because there was extra money that came into Highland Council, but we seem to be in a stand-on and a retracted situation. So I would like to. I don't want to see services cut. I don't think it should be cut, but I think the budget has to be challenged going forward as to how some of the conclusions that are made are delivered the way that they are. So yeah, I would like to understand the budget more, and how it's actually managed, how it's delivered, and how they come to the cuts, because it seems quite a complicated picture. It's a massive budget. It's huge. So you can't make that decision, in a few days or even maybe a couple of weeks. You need to have the knowledge and the expertise and the people backing you to make the tough decisions.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. Colin, please.
Yeah, the clues in the question, I think, is the ideological pressure that's coming. The budget has been done because the loans that the Highland Council are taking out are far too expensive to maintain. Therefore, they're slashing quite drastically. I don't think it's possible. I don't actually think it's realistic. If you're looking to see where you cut money, it's where we're paying out the most just now. It's just in the private initiatives, the PPIs, the private companies that we're employing and subsidising. So I think that they have to be looked at.
Good, and thank you. There is a kind of really similarly related question here, which is to do with waste in the council. I don't know if candidates want a second shot at that, but it's very, very similar, but it's slightly different. What projects would you like to see being funded by Highland Council rather than the daft ones they seem to fund? So the question is kind of about waste. Do you want a second shot at that or not? I don't mind if you don't. Colin, you got the mic, yeah. Mm-hmm.
For me, waste is the actual key. Just now, the recycling centre is...
I think it's about financial waste.
No,
never mind.
No, it's the same thing. It
That's
really
okay.
is, because we are collecting
Mm-hmm.
all the rubbish from individuals, and it is going back to private use. It is going back for private profit. So these things have to be re-looked at, re-examined, and one, reducing waste, and reducing costs.
Okay, good use of the question. Dennis, please.
Well, apart from the things that I've already mentioned, which are housing or flexible housing and helping young people start up in business, one other thing I would draw attention to is things like rural toilets. You'll have noticed that Skye, because it appeared on CNN's blacklist as being a place not to go to last year, has now secured extra funding of a six-figure nature. I live just near to a beach at Try, which is absolutely, in the summertime, it's mobbed. Caravanettes park on the edge, almost fall into the sea. The public toilets were closed some years ago by Highland Council, and they've now been vandalised. In terms of providing facilities for visitors, and after all, we want the visitors because they spend the money, I think toilets are about the most basic one imaginable. I would like to see a relatively small sum of money, maybe a few tens of thousands of pounds, spent on issues like that. And I'm sure Highland Council will find there are other toilets in the same boat. It was a few years ago they were actually going to close Arisaig's toilets, but the Community Trust in Arisaig took them over, fortunately, and still maintain them. Now, I sometimes think there are essentials and there are things that are not so essential. I happen to think things like rural toilets are essential.
Good, thank you, Dennis. Catherine, please.
Just pick up on the cutting waste. When I worked for Standard Life in Edinburgh for a short while, we had a committee that was known as the High Standards Committee, and they used to meet quite a lot, and they sat round a table and talked about how could we do things better and cut waste, and waste of time, waste of money, waste of energy. And I don't know whether the Highland Council has that, but I think all of us as members of the Highlands and people who are being served by the Highland Council, we should all be a part of a think tank that throws into the Highland Council. We've all had conversations about that's ridiculous, why are they wasting money on that? Well, as that information all got fed back to a committee at the Highland Council that could then look at the issues and see whether it really was a waste of money and time, I think the Highland Council might start to do things quite differently. One thing that springs to mind is heating. My children come home, they won't wear jumpers to school, they won't wear jackets to school because it's too hot in school. Now, heat costs money, so there must be waste there. I come here every Wednesday night for the Gaelic choir, and we're all roasting at Gaelic choir. I go on a Tuesday night to the Gaelic school to teach a class, and I'm always roasting. Because I go in my woolly jumpers that I wear at home, and so there's overheating, whether it's just their new heating system. So I think there's waste everywhere within Highland Council, and I think we probably all could come up with suggestions in order for ways to cut money, and I think to focus on that would be a good idea.
Good, thank you, and we should have put the lights out in the other half hall before someone else said it. Thank you. Alex, please.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Catherine, what you said there, although I'm not a Gaelic singer. You don't want to hear me singing Gaelic. I think it goes back to the budget again, and questioning the budget and the spending, and I think by drilling down you'd maybe find out where the waste is. I mean, I do hear things in my own area where, you know, we're doing all this recycling. You know, I do all my recycling. I'm anal about it. But then I hear that maybe only 50% of what I've recycled actually is recycled. And that's quite annoying, to be honest, to hear that. And when you question it, you're told, no, everything is recycled. But I do hear, you know, that is maybe one element of waste, because there's a huge cost to that. And I would like to see it being delivered properly. So that's my kind of idea of waste money and waste recycling.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Any other questions from the floor, Glenn? No.
Yes, now. I'm Gwyn Moses from Kinlochil, and I work on the High Street as well. The question really is almost going back to Liberty, but where will you put 400 new houses which will be needed in Lochaber within, say, 20 miles of Fort William? So really it's sort of, where can you physically fit 400-ish new houses?
Thank you very much. Catherine, please.
I mean, that's certainly one of the challenges, and that's something that needs to be thought about, you know, when we're welcoming all these new jobs. I don't think there's an easy answer to that, although it's not necessarily within 20 miles of Lochaber, because people do now travel long distances. People commute from here to Inverness, they commute from here to Glasgow and travel all around, so not necessarily everyone that's working there would be living here. There's always a pressure for housing and for new housing, and there's areas within the local plans that are designated for housing, but certainly it's something that's going to be a big issue if all of these jobs come to fruition.
Okay, thank you. Alex, please.
Yeah, you would think when you see the amount of land in the area that it would be easy to find the land to put all of these houses, but I know from a project in my area where there was quite a number of affordable houses built, and it's a lot of land for a small amount of houses. So it's going to be a huge challenge. And to be honest, sitting here tonight, I don't personally have the answer for that. But again, that's something that you would have to do in collaboration with everybody, all the stakeholders, because you're going to have to make some very quick decisions about that, because Liberty are coming down the track quickly and they've got big ambitions. And the last thing you want to do is not be able to, be able to house people, and they're going to be driving long distances. It puts a lot of pressure, not just locally, but out with the area as well. in that respect.
Good, thank you, Alex. Colin Wood, please.
It's a good question. With 400 houses, you're going to have 800 to 1,000 more people. So where are you going to fit them into schools? Where are you going to fit them into the NHS services? So, no, it's a very good question. I don't think you can build a new village without building all the other services, so I don't know.
Okay, thank you very much, Colin. Dennis, direction, please.
Highland Council seems to have an online development plan with zoning of various places which they would prefer housing to take place. And one of the things which I noticed was that they wanted it to be compact. In other words, they didn't want housing to be too dispersed because it then puts pressure on other facilities and so on. My sort of feeling here is that the layman can only sort of intervene up to a point. Obviously, this is where a certain amount of expertise is required, because when I was looking at this plan, there were words like pluvial and fluvial coming up in terms of flooding and so on, which were all new to me. But I thought, right, this is where you need experts to help you, because it's not always the case that what looks to be a suitable site turns out to be suitable. I can well remember many years ago when Lochaber District Council was in being, they invested something like 30,000 trying to put a new graveyard in a village not very far from where I was, only to find out after they'd invested the money that the ground was totally unsuitable. So I think one has to take a certain amount of sort of lead from the experts in this one, but there is a plan and there are certainly areas which are scheduled, preferentially scheduled for development.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. But I can certainly mention that the Highland Council and HIE are jointly looking at something called 2040 Vision, and that is some kind of revamp of the West Development Plan, looking at the entire area from Corpor through to Fort William. My understanding is that that plan goes to the Lochaber Committee of the Council. I think it's on the 11th of April. It's certainly online when that meeting is. And we need to pay attention to this. You know, people really need to be aware of what's proposed. My understanding is that there might be a couple of hundred houses on the Blarmore. There might be houses, again, it's public information, on the golf course. So, you know, people need to kind of sit up and pay attention here. Anyway, I'm meant to be the independent chair. But I strongly believe in community development, and I believe in communities leading the development. Anyway, there you are. Need to pay attention to what's going on round and about us. Any more questions from the floor, please? Sorry, I guess I could.
I was just wanting to link in with that. When Liberty make that investment and have their building, the council has an agreement with investors that they need to spend a proportion of their percentage of their spend on community investment. Currently that's an art project. I was wondering what you would like to push for that instead for the area.
Okay, so this is a question of community benefit. Can we start off with Dennis, please?
One of the supermarkets has a sort of box arrangement where they give you a token, and you then decide when you go to the door which of the boxes you want the token to go into. In other words, which charity you prefer. My feeling is here that I would rather stand back. I would rather actually let the community have a say. So if it could be possible to construct some sort of system whereby you invite people to register their preferences and then record that, and those that are most popular are the ones which secure the funding, that would be my ideal.
Okay, excellent. Alex, please.
Yeah, I'm a little bit agreement with Dennis here. I think I mentioned earlier that I've just been through a funding challenge with the pipe band, where we were allocated £2,000, which is fantastic. But I came away from there feeling really, really bad, to be quite honest, because there were 9 of us in the mix, and only 5 of us were actually allocated funding. And I feel really bad because there was a lady there, a disabled lady, and all she wanted was a small amount of money to put some disabled benches within the local area. And they had this voting system, and she didn't win the money. And I felt that was really bad. So I think it's a great initiative, but maybe an example of how it doesn't quite deliver everything that it could have done, because I actually, and you can't change things, but I stood at the end of that, felt really bad, and I said, I'm quite willing to give up some of the money, because I'm sure we'll be able to raise it later on. And I know something, I know she's going to be catered for, but yeah, I would leave it to the public to make that decision. But that would be an example of how you can get it wrong in some respects.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Catherine McKinnon, please.
We talked earlier about the budgets for the community councils being cut. Perhaps that's a way that the community councils could augment their budgets, and perhaps Liberty could work through the community councils to give them a bit more of an input into the community. So perhaps it's actually a golden opportunity for community councils.
Thank you. And Colin, please.
Yeah, I think it's important, first of all, to look at the funding deal that's on offer and not take the first offer that's given. I don't think an art installation is particularly needed. Lochaber's beautiful anyway, so.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Any more questions from the floor? Okay, I have no more questions here, so if there's nothing further, I'll close the meeting. So last chance. Come, yep, microphone, John, please.
Sorry, just didn't want anybody to go before 9 o'clock. What I'd like to ask is, how are our candidates going to hold Highland Council officials to account? Because our ex-councillors will probably be aware that many of the officials seem to make mistakes on occasions and never seem to be held responsible for those mistakes. So I'd be interested in hearing what would happen. Thank you.
Okay, there's an
examples. An example,
right, no.
This building, for example, we spent loads of money on this building and it's empty half the time. We are currently building a council building in town that is over budget. 2 examples.
Okay, right, a kind of unusual question, but really interesting. Colin, you've actually been given the microphone and you're actually first on my list for this question. So thank you.
Thank you for that. You're right. The first part of the question would be more transparency. You're absolutely correct. There's a lot of projects that just go nowhere and are buried and are put under the carpet. So more transparency as to where the money's getting spent and what you're getting back for that money. Regarding the community centre, yeah, you just have to look at this door at the far end to see that it's still leaking. There has to be more, with any project, there has to be more money put aside for any sort of repairs that are ongoing.
Colin, Dennis Strickson, please.
I think that my first priority would simply be to try and learn the ropes. If you're joining a council and you haven't experienced as a councillor before, you've got to learn how the system works and how best to deal with it. On the question of holding council officials to account, it's really important because although I touched on this in something earlier, one of the things I've been met with quite often on the doorsteps is a grievance at some of the council's planning decisions or housing allocation decisions. Now obviously this is a really tricky issue if you're a third party and you don't know all the details to grips with, but there's no doubt that there is considerable disquiet in some quarters. How do you tackle this? Well, I think the way you don't tackle it is by charging at it like a bull in the china shop and saying, why have you done this, why have you done that, why are you the next thing? I would prefer to do it on a cooperative basis. In other words, I'm the new boy, please could you explain to me how these decisions have been arrived at, and then introduce some of the complications which maybe your individual ward members have brought to you, and say, well, in that case, why isn't this working, or why hasn't that happened? I think the other thing is persistence. We've all been plagued by potholes in the recent past. My feeling on that one would be I would take a photograph of every pothole that I had consistently to the roads department until that was fixed. And I would be back there every week or fortnight or every 3 weeks saying, this hasn't been fixed yet. I think it is partly about a sort of patient process of persistent knocking on a door until eventually somebody either gets so fed up with you that they do it, or that you persuade them that it's worth doing.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. Catherine, please.
Seeing the looks on the faces of our ex-councillors, I'm not going to be over-optimistic that I'm going to change the world. I think it comes back to what I said about waste. And I think it's up to all of us. Every time that you have a grievance, you need to go through their procedure. You need to fill in the formal complaint. You need to complain about the services. You need to say that this isn't working. And if everyone's doing that, then surely at some point that comes through the system and there has to be some feedback on it. I mean, I've had my own battles with the planning department, with the transport department, and I know that there is almost a brick wall sometimes that you come up against. But certainly as a councillor, you've got a wee bit more clout. You can actually go into the offices, you can speak to the people, you can intercede on behalf of the people who've got the grievances. And I think that's what the role of the councillor is. It's actually to analyse what the situation is and where a solution might lie, and perhaps build a rapport with the various officials that you're talking to and trying to resolve those issues. On the big capital investment project, well, I think the council itself is learning its own lesson from the PPP that's coming home to roost right now. And I mean, people may recall I proposed a public-community partnership in Roybridge, which was a direct sort of opposition to the public-private partnerships that the council were doing at the time. It got some interest, but it's interesting now to see that in Struntian, that's exactly what the Struntian Community School are doing, and the council are actually going with that now. So times have moved on, and the council perhaps does learn lessons, but it takes a long time. And I think you can't expect one councillor, even a group of councillors, to do it. I think we're all responsible, and I think we all need to take the council to task when they need to be taken to task.
Catherine, Alex, please.
It goes back a bit to, we're talking about what Catherine mentioned there, waste, budgets, who's responsible. If you've got leaks in this building and it's not, somebody signed that off. You know, if you've got a proper contract and you've got snagging clauses in the contract, so who signed it off? Surely it wasn't the council that signed it off. It must have been the council was the contractor. So, you know, these things you don't pay for if they're not being delivered. They have to put them right. It's quite a complicated process. I mean, a bit like anything, I don't really understand fully the council contracts, how they work. So you'd need to learn that, exactly how they operate. I do understand how contracts work, but they're different in different businesses and whatever's been delivered. So yes, I would, you know, it is a bit of a learning curve, but at the end of the day, if there's waste because contracts aren't being signed properly or delivered properly, then somebody has to be questioning it, I would say.
Thank you, Alex. Interesting that no one mentioned the previous Lochaber Area Committee from 96 to 2007. We had, for about 5 of these years, we had quarterly public question and answer sessions, and the 8 councillors sat there in Lochaber House with maybe up to about a dozen officials, and we've had up to about 90 people in the audience for these, and that, the whole idea of the area committee was to allow scrutiny of the operation of the council in the eyes of the local community, and that certainly made people, the councillors didn't like it, the officials didn't like it, but it certainly exposed the council, you know, when you could have that number of people quarterly in a public forum. I thought it was a really, really good thing, and we also had, now we're on Nevis Radio, members were on Nevis Radio for phone-in programs. They didn't like that either, but it was good fun. Okay, right, that's enough from me. I think we're just in the final straight now, and I would like to invite our candidates to make their closing statements, and I'll do so in the reverse order. Billy, I'll give Billy a question. Thank you, Billy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, so the question, can I make the question general about speeding vehicles and speed limits? Yeah. Okay, there's a question. Can we start at this end, Alex, please, and we'll give Billy that question, and then we'll close up. Thank you. The question is, what do you feel, and what might you do about speed of vehicles in Corpach? At the moment, it's a 30-mile-an-hour limit. I'm aware the community councillor are striving to get a crossing point there. I know that they're in touch with Transport Scotland, and I think that's the article from the Community News that Billy's referring to. So just briefly, if you would make a comment on that. Thank you. Alex, thank you.
Yeah, for me, the best way to resolve it, and I've been through this a few years ago, process, so you put in place registration identification, you bring it in, and certainly in the case that I'm thinking about, that resolved it very quickly. There were a lot of people convicted over the course of a number of days, and that was to do with the school. Yeah, and that is something. It's something you have to bring in. There's a cost to it because it's not something that every council or community sits with. But that is one way that you could resolve it. But really, people shouldn't be driving that fast. I mean, the school in Corpach there, it's quite obvious. It's a 20-mile-an-hour sign when you come into the school.
Thank you. Catherine, please.
The transport police are very vigilant and have got a lot of people between the distillery and Carr's Corner, and their van sits there all the time. Perhaps they just need to move it along to Corpach and focus on that area, because I think unmarked. I think everyone's checked it now. Yes, but absolutely, they just need to. You need to shout as loud as you can and get a focus on that and get them absolutely focusing. Well, police, transport police, I guess.
I think your community councillors are making note of that, Billy. They're in the room here. Dennis, please.
Well, I think I'm in agreement with the other two. The police is a starting point. I mean, I know I used to travel up and down to Glasgow a great deal, and there are certain spots the police used to wait because they often caught people there, and you learn to know them and you think, yes, jolly good, they're doing their job. But the second one is these flashing circular signs which tell you your speed. They use them very effectively in Glasgow. And my feeling is that, you know, if you have one of those which flashes at you, you're doing 32 or 34 or whatever it might be, I think that's effective, and I think it also possibly doesn't involve huge expense, probably much less expensive than having a police speed unit there. So, and if necessary, more than one. So that would be my sort of short-term fix. Get plenty of these flashing signs which tell people, tell motorists what speed they're currently going at, and so that they know they have to brake.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. And Colin, please.
Thank you. Yes, it's there is a Angry 30 sign. It is a real problem. Try to get over from one island to the other one to the Corpach shops you are taking your life in your hands at times. Also, if you ask the lollipop lady at the Corpach school, some of the cars are charging down there as well. What's the best way? I think education. We're all using the same roads. We're all the same. I think, apart from obviously the tourist months. It's locals, so education has to be the key, and if it's name and shaming, then that's one way to go.
Okay, thank you very much, Colin. Right, I'll now invite candidates to make their closing statements, and in the reverse order from the beginning, could we start with Dennis Rickson, please?
Well, first of all, thank you, because I've learned a lot tonight, and I think that's essential. I was struck by what John was saying about the local area committees, that councillors didn't like them. And in a way, part of me says that's absolutely right. We shouldn't feel comfortable. Nobody should feel comfortable if they're holding a public office. And at the end of the day, the more scrutiny, the more sort of public voice, the better. So I would welcome that sort of approach. The other thing is that no councillor can conjure more money out of anywhere. So I think it is a matter very often of looking at efficiency. We've discussed some of this business. I know for myself from the education field, there are lots of areas in which I could suggest you'd be better spending the money on class contact time between teachers and pupils as opposed to administration and bureaucracy. I also think I would like to stress the business of more transparency. In other words, when councils make decisions, that the reasons for them are transparent to the public. You've possibly heard that in Skye just now there are awful shenanigans about the provision of health services and the new hospital and so on and so forth. It seems to occupy the pages of the West Highland Free Press frequently. So it is really important that locals feel that whatever decisions it is that the council make are there for scrutiny and there for discussion and, if necessary, for dispute. And finally, I would simply say that I think if any contribution that I could make, I would certainly be looking most closely at areas to do with housing, because that is a really sore complaint. If you want locals to stay here, if you want young locals to stay here and start their family here, you have to be able to provide them with houses. And the second thing is employment opportunities, and not just the big ones like Liberty. I'm really keen that young people should get the opportunity to start in business for themselves. But having been in business myself, because I ran a bookshop for umpteen years, having been in business, it is intimidating. There is an awful lot more paperwork now than there ever used to be. And I think we should be able to help our young people start by giving them incentives, by making things easier, by giving them advice.
Okay, thank you, Dennis. And Catherine McKinnon, please.
I don't have an awful lot more to add. I think a councillor should be at the disposal of the people. So I don't think you could go into a job as a councillor thinking, well, I'm going to do this, this and this. I think you have to respond to the situations that arise at the time and work on behalf of the people, because it's the people that the Highland Council exists to serve. Particular areas of interest that I have, well, obviously involved with family and children growing up, care and special needs in those areas, I think, which often get sidelined by the council, and I think there's a huge need for a focus on that just now. And also, obviously, we've talked about the challenges that are coming with, if there is this huge investment in Lochaber, then I think we all need to be vigilant as to how that's going to affect us and make our voices heard on that. So yes, I mean, my thoughts are that you need to be close to the people, you need to be able to respond to people's needs, and whatever it is at the time, you need to be there and to help analyse what the situation is and how you can actually make something better, or make something happen that isn't happening. So it's responding rather than actually being directive as to what you would do.
Thank you, Catherine. And Colin Wood, please.
Well, firstly, thanks for coming. There's an awful lot of people more than I expected. And we are all after the same thing. We are all well informed, and we are all working towards the community. It has to be community driven. That's the one thing why I'm independent. That's why I don't think this is a party decision. You have to sort the issues that we're having here just now and then work our way up. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. And lastly, Alex McInnes, please.
Yeah. When you look back at the history of Lochaber, there's a huge amount of strength here and resilience. So you come up, over many years. And if you actually look what you've got already, and the area's grown. So you've got the likes of, obviously you've got Liberty, but in its whole format, the aluminium production. So you've got marine tourism, you've got accommodation, whisky, the fishing, aquaculture, green services, and so it goes on. But certainly, in speaking to people the last few weeks, there is, and again tonight, being confirmed, the population growth is quite a worry, because it's massive in respect of other areas in Scotland. The housing, the social care, the transport links, the local services, the protection of the NHS, and you've got the likes of Malik and the harbour. I mean, I spend a lot of time coming across on the ferry. I've said this before, but I mean this time of year and going forward, and when I plan my month, I actually book my ferries, because I know that I just can't turn up. So there's that element, and that's part of the road and rail network as well. So there's a lot to do, and I agree with the rest of the guys here tonight that you can't do it on your own. You have to work in collaboration with everybody else and all the other stakeholders. It's the only way it's going to work.
Good. Thank you, Alex. Just before completely closing the meeting, and I'll invite John Gillespie up in a couple of minutes, I'll highlight again the event in Kamali Community Centre on Monday at Kamali Community Council meeting, where representatives from Liberty GFG Alliance will be there to talk about ideas about development in Corpach. Commend that to you. It's a privilege to me to have been asked to chair tonight. I've certainly enjoyed this. We got more turning out for this by-election than we did at the Hustings for the original election a year or so ago. I think we had about 32, we got about 35 or so. Anyway, that's really great, and I think it's tremendous for a Friday night. So thank you. Thank you for the candidates, for the brevity of your answers. Thank you particularly the electorate, because without an electorate then there is no Hustings. That's it. Thank you for the courtesy that you extended to the candidates. Also, personal thanks to Nevis Radio for always turning out, and Lochaber Times as well. So, John, as the host community councillor, I could invite you to do a formal vote of thanks. Thanks, John.
So, just open the bar. I don't think Sandra's still here. John's just taken all my lines. Surprise, surprise. I'd just like to give a formal vote of thanks to first the candidates for agreeing to stand. It's very brave. I would never do it. So just the fact that they've put themselves forward, I would thank them for that and for coming here tonight. We'd also like to thank John for his wonderful independent hosting of our hustings, and confirming that he's totally independent and never will be in a party or anything like that. So thank you to him. I'd also like to thank Nevis Radio for coming, and apparently we're all going to be wonderful stars on YouTube. So please look for yourselves on there. If we can get it up on the Facebook page, we will. And look out. Lastly, I'd like to thank yourselves for coming, because if you didn't shown up, it would have been very, very much a lot less talking and a lot less questions, and we would have all had to speak about ourselves, which I'm not very good at, and I know that most people aren't here. So I'd just like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank Christine as well, and Kamali Community Council, and obviously Cool Community Council for hosting this, and hopefully we won't be hosting another one too soon, because we've done quite a bit of this recently. So the longer that we can wait till the next one, the more I would like it. So thank you very much for coming, and good night.